in spite of the Republican Party's recent failure to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they are now taking aim at it once again. Now, part of the reason why they couldn't get the repeal of the Affordable Care Act through Congress was because members of the Freedom Caucus just wouldn't get on board. Now, that seems to be changing. It seems as though Freedom Caucus members who were once reluctant are warming up to this new proposal to gut the Affordable Care Act, and their new proposal is even worse than the one that they proposed last time. However, there are some moderate Republicans who are against it. So I'll talk about the prospects as to whether or not this will pass or not, but first I want to get to Paul Ryan's remarks on the bill.
We believe that there are additional reforms and ideas that can do both things: protect people with pre-existing conditions and continue to lower premiums and give states flexibility so that more insurers can come into the marketplace. One of the concerns we have is that insurers are leaving left and right, and people are down to like one choice, and in some cases, no choices. That's not good. Having a monopoly isn't a choice, it's a monopoly. And so what we're trying to do is find the kinds of provisions that bring more insurers into the marketplace so that people have more choices, and with more choices, you have more competition, and with more competition, you have lower prices. And we are all dedicated to making sure that people with pre-existing conditions still get the kind of coverage that they need, and that's affordable coverage. And we want to find a way to do that in such a way that everyone else who's in the insurance market can also get lower premiums, affordable choices, and more competition. So that's what this is all about.
Now, what you just heard might sound peachy keen, but in actuality, he's lying to you. He is using Orwellian doublespeak, because even though he's saying that he will make sure that people with pre-existing conditions do not get discriminated against by health insurance companies, this bill effectively allows health insurance companies to discriminate against people, and this is because he is allowing states to determine whether or not companies can do this. Now, the Huffington Post explains Representative Tom MacArthur on Tuesday formally unveiled an amendment to the American Health Care Act, the bill to repeal Obamacare that Republicans tried to get through the House last month. The amendment, which Huffington Post's Matt Fuller first reported last week, is the product of negotiations among key Republicans, including Vice President Mike Pence. The measure's supporters insist that their proposal would not harm people with serious medical problems. In fact, a clause states explicitly, nothing in this act shall be construed as permitting health insurance issuers to limit access to health care coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions. But that is exactly what it would do. By now, most people know that the Affordable Care Act protects people with pre-existing conditions, but not everybody realizes that the law accomplishes this through several mechanisms that interact. The law doesn't simply prohibit insurers from denying coverage outright to people with medical problems. It also prohibits insurers from charging those people more, or from selling policies that skimp on or leave out key benefits, rendering insurance useless to people who depend on those benefits. Under the new proposal, insurers still couldn't reject people who have pre-existing conditions, but states could allow insurers to charge those people higher premiums and to sell policies without Obamacare's essential benefits. This approach provides access to people with pre-existing conditions in theory, but not in practice, since they'd be charged astronomical premiums if states allow it. This is what Larry Levitt, senior vice president of the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation, said Tuesday evening. Basically, with this bill, we're back to square one, because what the Affordable Care Act did was it banned health insurance companies from discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions, and now they're saying, well, you know what? You still can't discriminate. You still have to offer people with pre-existing conditions insurance. However, you can charge them more if they do have a pre-existing condition. And effectively, what that does is it ensures that people with pre-existing conditions don't get healthcare. So, I mean, make no mistake about it. This effectively gets us back to square one before the clause, the anti-discrimination clause in the Affordable Care Act was codified into law. It gets us right back to square one. And it's a trick that Republicans are using. They're speaking out of both sides of their mouth, saying, you know what, we're making sure that we protect you and that these health insurance companies can't discriminate against you if you have a pre-existing condition. However, they can charge you a ridiculous price, and that will prevent you from getting insurance. But I mean, they can't discriminate against you. Well, that's exactly what discrimination is. If you are allowing health insurance companies to treat one group of people differently than another group of people, that's the definition of discrimination. That's unjust. But Paul Ryan is using Orwellian doublespeak to sell this to you. And, it sounds lovely when you hear him speak about it, but when you dive into the details, it's heavily troubling. Now, keep in mind here that what's considered a, quote, pre-existing condition, well, that's up to the discretion of the health insurance industry. So if they think anything, even, as arbitrary as something that's simple is a pre-existing condition, they might use that as grounds to justify charging you a higher fee, even if you don't really have a pre-existing condition. But I mean, now that it's the case that people with pre-existing conditions will be discriminated against again, well, apparently this bill, it's more alluring to members of the House Freedom Caucus because they can't possibly get on board with the bill unless it sufficiently screws over the American people. And now that this really screws over people, now that people might die because they have a pre-existing condition and can't afford the astronomical price that health insurance companies impose because of this bill, now the Freedom Caucus is thinking, oh, you know what, this actually sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and get on board now. However, thankfully, there are some moderate Republicans who still don't like this bill, so it may not actually pass in spite of the Freedom Caucus getting on board because there are some reasonable moderate Republicans who are willing to have a spine and stand up for what's right for the American people. But what's interesting is that this story kind of takes a turn for the crazy when you find out that the GOP doesn't actually think this plan is great for the American people. Even though Paul Ryan will sell it to you as a plan that's fantastic for the American people, they don't actually believe that because Vox explains House Republicans appear to have included a provision that exempts members of Congress and their staff from their latest healthcare plan. Members of Congress and their staff would get the guarantee of keeping these Obamacare regulations. So when it comes to discriminating against normal citizens with pre-existing conditions, they're okay with that. But when it comes to members of Congress and their families and their staff, well, they want to make sure they're protected from that discrimination. So in other words, this healthcare bill is great for you, the peasants, but it's not good for the elites who run our country. Think about how selfish that is and how shameless they are. And this was hidden away. So, kudos to Vox for finding this because this is something that you could have easily missed, but they found it. But they later stated that this was just a loophole that they intended to actually close in the future, and they only included this provision because the Senate Budget Committee requested that they do that, so that way they can be compliant with Senate reconciliation rules. But the Senate Budget Committee actually came out and said, no, that's not actually the case. We did not tell them that they had to do this and include this provision. So, in other words, they got caught, and they're embarrassed that they got caught. So this healthcare plan, if you want to know how shitty it is, Republicans themselves don't want it, and they went out of their way, mind you, to create a provision to exempt them from it because it's so bad. So it's good enough for the American people, but not good enough for them, the oligarchs, the elites, because mind you, everyone in Congress, they're millionaires, they're oligarchs themselves. So this cannot stand, and hopefully there is the same resistance at town halls for Republicans that we saw the first time when they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, because the answer is you don't repeal the Affordable Care Act. Is it broken? Absolutely, but it was a step in the right direction. So we made some progress, but still, the Affordable Care Act left some people out, so we've got to expand it. Specifically, we expand that Medicare provision to everyone, and we end the healthcare debate once and for all.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.